Yeah, why not? Oh, goodness. Wow, check that out. We already have someone waiting for us in the queue.
Whoop, whoop.
Oh, man, you're two awesome, curious souls, I'm sure, here. Really want to know what is this about
They
noise
know
versus
the
music?
answers.
The philosophical answers to life, inside, outside, and everything in between. I love your thirst. Oh my goodness, three people waiting on us. Oh, it's more than people than we have here on
It's
camera.
true. On camera.
We're keeping all sorts of people right down here.
Okay.
Didn't mean it that way.
Okay.
All right. We're gonna wait around for just a minute, see if we can grab any extra viewers before we get started.
We lost one.
We lost. Can't go with those risque remarks. Okay, I'll be more careful now.
Oh, we got him back.
Hey, all right. It's just bad connectivity. That's
okay.
All. We'll wait around for a few minutes, but a good synopsis of what we will discuss here tonight is music versus noise. Like, how deep does this well go in terms of philosophy, right? And what's practical and what's just conceptual. I really want to get to the heart of really understanding the idea of intent and messages and meaning. We'll have a great discussion about it. We just got off an hour discussion about it. I have my friend Spencer Vanderveer here to help me with this discussion.
Hello.
He is not a student of mine. He is well educated from another origin. So I thought he would have a perfect perspective to add into this, basically unanswerable question.
Pretty much unanswerable question.
We're going to use this, though. We're going to be the fuel for our fire. We're going to use Spencer's previous experience as a little bit of fuel and fire to get this discussion really percolating. Mm-hmm.
Jimmy's jumping.
So if you have any questions about what do we mean by this, why is this such a discussion? Why do we need to talk about this? If you have any questions about the previous lesson that happened this week, we had melodies on Monday, we had rhythms on Tuesday, we had scales and keys on Wednesday, we had texture, temper, and form on Thursday. That would be last night. Tonight, we're going to try and wrap it all up. Since you've learned all of these cool ideas about music, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. And we'll also discuss, did you even need to take the previous 4 lessons to have this discussion?
Answer, no.
Spoiler alert. Don't worry, we'll cut that part out.
I have a question about rhythm for you. Is rhythm the hits or the spaces in between the hits?
Okay. So I would say that, well, they both have to exist.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So you cannot have
one without the other.
Yeah, there you go. If you were to have white noise, then there would be no silence and you would hear no rhythm.
Yep.
I feel so good. I answered that one.
So cute.
Oh, we'll chop that in a couple times. Pump up those views, baby.
That's right.
Go for the
Get after it.
Yeah, please take the time to maybe think of a question, any burning question related to music. We have 2 professionals here that are willing to take the time to discuss it with you, at least from our perspective. We'll give just a moment longer before we get going. Spencer Vanderveer was trained at
Santa Fe University of Art and Design. No, unfortunately, it no longer exists, but it was there for a while.
I hear some good stories about that school.
It was a lot of fun, a lot of really great teachers. It was a contemporary music program, not a conservatory program, meaning that the focus of the program was to studied all, well, not all, but a lot of the different facets of music, whereas the conservatory is more of the classical, jazz, um, that sort of area where it's all sight reading and that sort of thing. Where in a contemporary program, you're studying world music that may or may not be written down. You're studying rock, you're studying funk, you're studying jazz as well. Um, you can still study classical style orchestral music, but it's a lot more open. And it was a great school. I miss it.
In particular, Spencer mentions his West African drum class quite often.
Yeah, that I took that one for 2 years. West. It was we drummed around a bit. We did Congolese stuff. We did Ghana stuff. Um, but it was a if you really want to work on your feel when it comes to rhythm, that's I would say grab a hand drum and start working it out, because that is one of the best ways to do it. It's fun. You might have some sore hands after a while, but you get used to it, and it's a lot of fun, and it will really clear some things up for yourself.
I think that my personal experience with a hand drum is that once you play it for extended sessions, you find the way to play it that allows your hands to last for those extended sessions. So we talked actually last night about dynamics in your music and the fact that volume and dynamics are related, but there's an important distinction to be made in terms of how the instrument is used. To use high dynamics may normally result in a high volume, but that volume can be altered. So if you were to use your instrument in a rough way, you could still be it could be a low volume application. So important distinction to be made, because if you are trying to play uh, a high dynamics, loud dynamics, you're playing forte, well, that can take a toll on your hands because you need that volume. But if you learn to play that forte with a particular like looseness, you can last for 2 hours or 3 hours constantly, constantly hitting this thing. And we could do the math on what the beats per minute are and how many notes you might be playing over 3 hours or 2 hours. That would be a fun tidbit to throw in at the end. But we're at our starting point.
Let's get after it.
All right. I think Spencer's ready. Welcome to our final lesson in this spring break music camp series. My name is Eric Carafino. This is Spencer Vanderveer. Say hello.
Hello.
And we are discussing tonight music versus noise. We've already gone over a lot of musical concepts. There's so much meat and potatoes over the past 4 days for you to digest. I'm hoping you can take just a little bit of that information that we discussed, a little bit of those thoughts and ideas that you may have come up with over the week, and you can apply them tonight to this abstract, very, very difficult question. When is sound music and when is sound noise? So I would like you to get started with a nice big deep breath, just like we did all week long. You're going to think of your body as a big red balloon, and you're going to just take it in, and you're going to be like one of those frogs with the big puffy, So, ready. Inhale. Hold it. If you're really focusing, you should feel your shoulders loosen up, your neck, your chest, even your face is starting to loosen up as you do this. We'll do it 2 more times. Breathe in. Hold it. And now. More relaxed, more loose. 3rd time. Here we go. Breathe in. All right. Hopefully by now you've kind of reset your feelings and all of your senses. we're going to get started with our conversation today. Let's see, how did we get started last time?
You presented it, and we started talking about it.
Right, so music versus noise. That's right. My basic concepts.
Yeah, we presented each of our.
There we go.
Yeah.
So my basic concept of what music is versus noise is I believe that they're actually mutually exclusive concepts. So if something, even though it is subjective from person to person, different people will decide this is music and this is noise. I do believe that it is exclusive. You cannot consider something noise and at the same time believe it to be music. Spencer has his own approach to this. Go ahead and explain it.
I do. I believe that music and noise are not separate from each other. There's not a hard line between the two. I think it's a spectrum. I think the line can waver between the two. It comes down to form. It comes down to so many things. It's subjective, of course. Everybody's opinion is going to differ on what is and what isn't music, what is and what isn't noise. You know, you get the old trope: a father bursts into the son / daughter / whatever, whoever's room, and they say, "Turn that noise off," or "Turn that noise down," or "Turn that down," whatever. Is that not music to the father? Or it's all opinion based. It's all subjective.
Yeah, you're 15-year-old you, and you're in your bedroom, and you've got your stereo cranked playing ABBA or whatever you're cranking, and parents
interesting choice.
parents come in and they start yelling at you, turn that noise down. I'm trying to watch TV, or I'm trying to read,
trying to watch the wheel.
My dad was pretty good at that, by the way. So we've already gotten into an interesting confrontation, right? Because one person is blasting it very, very loud, high volume, because they're enjoying it and want to enjoy it perhaps more fully at these loud volumes. And they're creating a disturbance. Dad or mom comes in, says, turn that down. I don't want to hear it. So we already have an interesting distinction. What do you think? What do you think is the dynamic here between these two people and the sound? One person is enjoying it completely, wants to have it around. The other person wants it gone. Polar opposites. All right, so we're talking about the subjectivity, right?
Absolutely. It's all about who's listening, how they're listening, what their personal experiences is, all that sort of thing. Also, this is an interesting fact that I just thought of, or a thing that I thought of last time we were talking about it, but the subject already passed. Could it be deemed that the only reason why the music was considered "quote unquote" noise by the parent figure is because of all of the physical barriers where he's not getting the full message? He's only hearing the rumblings, right?
Mm.
Could that be? I think it could. Could that be part of the issue? Why the message isn't transmitting as cleanly as it could be to the parent as it is to the child?
Sure, we could be talking about noise in the classical sense. Noise as something that degrades the quality of a message, to be considered separate from the noise that we're talking about. Noise in the classical sense degrades a message. So if I'm trying to say, look out, everyone, there's a fire, but let's say I've been gagged by the person who set the fire. Ooh, the plot thickens, right? I certainly had a message, but did you hear the message? Did you get any meaning from what I just did? Maybe some of it, but not the real message. The intention of the message, well, didn't quite come across, right? We could, I don't think style or content would really apply here, but the intention was to warn everyone about the fire, yet there was something in the way.
Maybe you could consider the warning as the content, but the intention of panic is still probably there.
Intention of panic. Oh, that's good. That's kind of a not a something that cannot necessarily be controlled.
Yeah, I mean it when it comes to talking about music and noise and sound and everything, there's always going to be those situations where you have the music that you're listening to that doesn't have any lyrics, so they're not explicitly saying what this is about. You have instrumental works that have no lyrics, there's no cliff notes, there's no nothing to tell you what this is about, but you can inherently feel the emotion, the vigor, the incense that is behind that. So the content may be clouded, but the intention is still there. At least the emotional intention.
Most certainly. And talking about noise, my intention would be to warn everyone and hopefully come out to a good outcome of this building being set on fire, or at least the best possible outcome. And I've thought of my content, and I knew my style. It was going to be yelling. I was probably going to be panicking. Maybe we could put my style as panic.
Yeah.
But there was something in the way. Noise was in the way. There was a physical barrier to my message and my intention and my content being pure and true. So this is something to consider in terms of communications and music. Now, I want to make sure that we make the allowance that some people don't think so heavily or deeply about music. Sometimes music is just an event to be enjoyed. Perhaps there's no direct message. And also, what about the possibility of someone putting that muffled yell into their music? They know that it cannot be understood, but they wanted a muffled yell. What do you think about that?
Well, and that actually kind of happens a lot. You'll hear a lot of artists who use screams, yells, cries, that sort of thing. One of the most famous is from the song "Roller Coaster of Love." There is a scream that happens right at the beginning. It's really faint in the background, covered with reverb. It's kind of hard to hear. There was a story that said that the front album cover of it had a lady with what looked like honey pouring on her, right? But what it actually was like broiling hot wax, and the scream you heard was her being covered with the wax. Or there was another story that said she was being beaten up or whatever by the producer while they were recording the song. That's all untrue. The song is called Roller Coaster of Love. What do you do on a roller coaster? You scream. So the scream was supposed to be like somebody on a roller coaster going down. But the same so the intention can be taken any which way, right? You can have the intention of, oh, it's a roller coaster and people scream, which is what I believe the artists were intending to have that be. Mm-hmm. But then people took it super dark. And
as
we're
people
like,
tend to do, right?
Somebody's being maimed or murdered in the next room. Obviously, that's what that scream is.
Just always just thinking the worst of things, Well, so what Spencer has described here, in more general terms, this scream would be what we might call in communications a signal. It's a stimulus. One of the basic tenets of communication is that one cannot not communicate. And what that means is that if you are perceivable, if one of your senses is able to discern a signal, a stimulus, then that stimulus is always sending a message. So you as a person, by the way you dress, by the way you do your hair, all of those things, you are unintentionally sending messages out to other people. So whenever it comes to intentionality, we can actually say that in some cases, there was no intentionality, yet there was content. So whenever you think about this, maybe in a reverse engineering aspect, you might think maybe you need to start with style and aesthetics so that maybe your intention will be more pure. Or maybe without intention, your style will create the content that you were looking for. That was a bit of a twist on the reverse engineering.
Sure was.
Yeah.
And I think there are acts that actually that use their style to create their content, and that is their intention.
The intention is meta. The
Yeah.
intention is for there to be no intention, for you to decide. And, that's definitely a marketing tactic or a psychological tactic to make something general enough that people can identify with it, but make meaning of their own so that your product becomes popular. Everyone sees it in their own way, and yet still at the same point agrees with each other. And so you get the bandwagon effect of everyone agreeing with this nebulous thing that had no intention. Think of all the viral videos of, a little kitty cat just falls off of a counter. Everybody laughs. The intention, I guess, was to make you laugh.
Yeah.
But the cat certainly didn't intend that.
I'm sure the cat did not intend that.
Poor little guy. So, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So we've talked about style, intent, and content. I would like you to maybe weigh in. What is your sense now in terms of intentionality behind music? Sometimes, even if something wasn't intentional, it can still mean something, like a running toilet. I know that whenever my toilet's running, though there's many possibilities. Maybe somebody just flushed it and it's filling up. But maybe if I listen for a while
And it continues.
then I'm going to draw a new conclusion. There wasn't the toilet had no intention of running. The toilet it's an inanimate object. We can all agree on this. But I still got content from the toilet's running, right? From my auditory senses. If I go and investigate and I use some visual sense, I will get more of the message and I will understand what that signal means more clearly. If I were to access the information in a more thorough manner. So I think that this can bring up the talk about somebody who does not maybe practice music, somebody who does not play an instrument, somebody that would maybe say, quote unquote, they're unmusical or they have no talent or skill. Does that mean that they're not allowed to have an opinion on music? Does that mean that their opinion is invalid?
No, I would say not. And I always like to use the example that I learned when I was in college from my teacher, Dr. Stephen Paxton. He asked us a similar question, which is, if someone has no musical training and doesn't play an instrument, they just listen to the radio, has an opinion on something, and you yourself, as a trained musician who does have a degree and can play an instrument, has an opinion, is either one of those person's opinion more valid? And he asked the class this question, and the whole class tried to answer, and there was a lot of people who said, well, I spent the time training, I've spent the time listening, I've spent the time exploring. Obviously, my opinion is more valid. And then there were other people who said no, and then he came out and said, and I do agree with this, he said, everybody's opinion is valid. The only difference between you and that person is that we, as people who have studied it and worked on it and explored it, we have a vocabulary to explain why we enjoy something. Whereas that person, they just enjoy it. And they don't have the vocabulary to back it up. It sounds nice. They like the trumpets. They like the guitar. They like the weird yell in the background. That's, exactly. That they like that, and they don't have the vocabulary and they don't feel the need to explain why. Whereas we, as professionals, sometimes will go overboard with, oh, I really like that 2-5-1 change that you did during the bridge part. That led you to the half diminished ninth. That brought us back to the one. And it's like, and so
does the fact that you know what to call it mean that you can actually enjoy it more? Is it necessary?
No, it's all completely subjective. I don't think, it's all a point. It's all from your perspective and what you like and what you don't like. And more training and more whatever doesn't increase or decrease that. It just stays the same. It's your opinion.
It's possible that the styles of listening, play into this heavily. Mm-hmm. One argument that I actually think that's worth exploring here is if somebody has a greater knowledge of a particular thing, doesn't that mean that they are more aware and more keen to the things that they are able to listen to, and able to, like, to be able to appreciate the technicality of something?
Yeah, I think that does have a bit of a it does have a bit of sway when it comes to that. The more you listen to something and the more you get used to something, you're going to explore and look for more stuff. If that's what you're into, and you'll find things about something that, like, 2 years ago you didn't like it for A, B, and C, but now, after having those other experiences and listening to those other things, you'll have a new appreciation for certain parts. It may not be your favorite thing, and it is like learning to listen is it's a skill in and of itself. In my experience, there's two types of listening. There's active and passive listening. Basically, when you're sitting down, you put a record on, you're sitting down and you're listening to the record just for the sake of listening to the record. That's what you would call active listening. You're there to do that. Whereas passive listening is, let's say you're driving, you're at work, you're on a walk, there's something else happening to where the music, the listening isn't at the forefront of what you're doing. So you're creating noise by having those other activities go on, so you can't get the full message that is being transmitted, and for you to decode. The way you're decoding has deteriorated.
Or perhaps passive decoding.
Yeah, passive decoding, so you're only getting half the message, or maybe less, maybe a little more. It just depends on what the activity is.
This is something we mentioned noise earlier in the classical sense of noise, not the noise versus music concept that we're talking about. Is that there's types of noises. So there's external noise, wherein I might have that muffle, but then there are times when there's internal noise, where you could say that that's something more conceptual rather than physical. Internal noise could be like it could be an actual functional defect in your brain that prevents you from hearing something, or from communicating something in particular. Another type of internal noise would be language barrier. If your intention, let's say, is to shout, "There's a fire, everyone leave," but you say it in French, everyone here speaks English, there's kind of an internal noise in terms of not being able to understand the message, because you don't understand the signal. You don't know what that signal's intention is. Although you can get part of it. They're yelling.
Yeah,
and they seem upset.
There's a panic there.
Right.
So something's going on.
So all of these things mean that maybe if there is that internal noise, right, maybe a little extra investigation would do you some good. Maybe you could get a little more information try again. Maybe use some hand signals, maybe body language, different types. But it would take an active effort on the listener to try to decode,
to understand what's happening.
So that's a perfect segue to actually talk about the communication model. We talked about kind of like listening styles, right? So we just come off of passive listening versus active listening. An active listener might sit down, play that record, and try to find every sound in the record, every little overdub, every little echo, maybe listen to a small little pop or crack, and maybe that's not music because it was maybe an accident for that pop or crack to be there, but for some reason it just makes it more enjoyable to that person. To be subjective like that. We had the discussion about vinyl versus hi-fi. Some people love the vinyl
because of the hiss, crack, and pop that comes when you play vinyl. The more you play it, the more it degrades, and the more of that sort of tonality, that timbre you get. As you use it, it destroys itself.
Let's come back to that one.
It's a lovely sentiment.
Oh man, impactful statement that Mr. Vanderveer has. So the idea of the communications model, and this is just a way to study to approach the unanswerable question of what is music and what is noise. We can analyze it in terms of communications and like just the way that information is transmitted, right? Because we've talked about signals, and if a person stands up on stage with an instrument and a sound system, they're probably trying to send a signal. They probably have an intention, right? So what we'll say is that they have a message, whatever that message may be. It may be, here is a really, really fun, upbeat guitar or a very, very fun, upbeat drum part. And so that's a message. It is a stimulus, it is a signal. And the person who's making that signal has probably an intention, maybe to get paid that night, right?
Pay that rent.
So they've got the message. They're like, okay, my message to you is it's time to have fun. So here's a really cool drum beat that I know. So what they've done is they've encoded the message. Hey guys, it's time to have fun. So they get up on their drum set, right? Encoded the message, right? And it's been transmitted because they're beating on drums through an auditory system. Now they can't help that you're watching them too. So they probably dressed up in a cool costume at the same time. Maybe a cool costume that says, hey guys, it's time to have fun.
Or they're doing stick twirls or
There you go. Maybe they have this really impressive drum set. Shout out to Kevin Kingen. Yeah. Go check out Kevin Michael Francis Kingen's videos. He what a personality.
Absolutely.
So it's been transmitted through this auditory channel. And also through a visual channel. If it was just a recording, take the visual part out, right? Unless you're staring at the wheels spinning or you're staring at the record, right? That wasn't the author's intention.
No,
but it plays a part.
I mean, you could also be staring at the album cover. That was part of back in the day. That was part of the experience of listening to vinyl, was to look at the record cover while you listen.
Your Indian style in the living room, right in front of the speakers. Heck yeah. So it's been transmitted, and so this at this point we're talking about just the sender of the message, right? Sender has encoded, the sender has transmitted, and then now you, the listener, comes into the play. You're gonna get the transmission, and you're gonna have to make some meaning out of it. Now, if you're an active listener, you might come up with more meaning. You might put the extra effort into really, really figuring out the meaning here. At least the best that you can. If you're a passive listener, I would argue that you would get a substantially less amount of meaning. Agree.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just part of the deal. You're not going to catch every nuance. You're not going to catch every drum, every stick stroke. You're never going to catch every bass line if you're not, if your awareness isn't fully on the piece that's happening.
I say that's fair to say. If there are any questions about this as we go along, please be sure to chat them to me. Thank you so much for the chats so far. Really, really enjoying our discussion so far. We are about at the halfway mark, so I'm going to make sure we keep on going so that we can get to the big finale here. So decoding. You've decoded the message, and then generally you're going to start the cycle again. You're going to create feedback. Maybe that feedback is not quite so intentional. Maybe you have a style to help your feedback conform to a certain intention, because you can't always be on. Sometimes you do things on accident. Yeah. So you're going to feedback. And so if you start dancing, well, then that original message, that's a positive arousal. There's a word for you. Positive arousal. Hey, I got your message.
Go ahead.
It's true. It's a technical term. Arousal, positive. The feedback is then creating a positive feedback loop. It is telling the message, yes, good job. What your intention is being fulfilled. And so the message will probably carry on. It will be in a positive feedback loop. And this is where you get the energy of live shows.
Most live shows.
Most live shows, depends on the venue.
Anyways,
Sometimes there's noise involved.
We're gonna get off of that.
Yeah. Keep it positive. All
Keep it
right.
positive.
arousal.
Positive arousal.
So the idea here is that noise, now that we've gone through the process, there's a message. It's been put into a form. This pure message has already been kind of like whittled down because the pure message has to be encoded into something. So whether that is a drum beat or what have you, it could be anything. It could be, everybody get on your feet, right? Could do that over the microphone. It's been encoded, it's been transmitted auditorily, and also by the way that you maybe your body language as you yell out at the crowd. And then the crowd is going to have to decode that message. They're going to have to make meaning of that message. If they're passively listening, they might not respond. They might not give very good feedback. They'll have feedback negative, right? Oh, I'm being ignored. It's very, very hard to keep this loop going because I'm being ignored, right? I'm not getting positive feedback. So within this whole process, you do have noise. In the classical sense, noise. We talked about internal noise, external noise. Maybe there's a language barrier involved. Maybe there's a jackhammer running. Anything.
Well, so whenever you have, I'm gonna
go ahead.
Yeah. Whenever, and you mentioned this in our last video, whenever you have a message, no matter what you do, it can be the purest, best thing ever. But the minute you encode it, it chisels a little bit away from that message. It takes a little bit away of the purity. And then once you transmit it, again, it takes a little bit more away. The same thing happens when you record. Your guitar, if let's say you're playing an electric guitar, your signal a little bit gets taken away every time you plug it into something. So let's say you have a big, vast pedal board. It may not be much, but a little bit of that signal gets pulled off by every pedal that signal goes through. And, there's the conversation about true bypass. And we're not here to talk about technology. We're here to talk about sound and noise, okay? But it does happen. It does. It takes a little bit away from that original signal, the original message that your guitar is putting out.
And a pedal board, for those of you that might not be super, super familiar, it's basically just like something that alters the sound in a desirable way.
Yeah.
It's people spend lots of money on these little modules that change the sounds. It's like if you put an alien effect on your voice or something.
A more easier to understand way is when your message, let's say you're calling somebody on the phone, your vocal message that you're putting out is being encoded and transmitted to the receiver, but through the encoding and transmission, the quality of your call goes down because of all of the extra steps it has to go through to get to Eric. Right. It's just how it goes. We can lessen and lessen as technology advances, but there's always going to be a little tiny bit of takeaway each time the message gets processed through any sort of thing.
Beautiful. So this takes us back full circle. We were just talking about vinyl records and how some people appreciate vinyl records, even though arbitrarily, like, just a fact, they have less fidelity and less quality than other types of music that may capture more of the spectrum of sound and transmit more of the spectrum of sound. Your vinyl record just has a diminished capability in that manner. But some people desire that. So what sense can we make of this idea? Are we getting any closer to the idea of music versus noise and the subjectivity of it?
You could say that the low, quote unquote, lower fidelity that comes from a vinyl record adds to the experience. And a lot of people do say that. I enjoy vinyl records. Eric enjoys vinyl records. We know a lot of people who do. But there's also something to say about, like, well, I know a lot of people who also don't like vinyl records because of the popping, the hissing, the cracking, all that stuff. It takes away from them, and it's more of a distraction than it is to an additive experience when it comes to listening. Unless you're going to go full digital all the time.
And this takes us into the last session around. We had somebody, or actually, I think you mentioned lo-fi is a movement now.
It is. It absolutely. I think it's always kind of been a movement. They just didn't. There hasn't been a name for it until somewhat recently. But I think there's always been people who enjoy lo-fi hip hop was the example that we used. It's really popular right now. A lot of people like to listen to it while they're working, doing homework, that sort of thing. Um, and there's all kinds of lo-fi whatever. There's blues people who will only like to record in lo-fi settings because it makes them sound like the original recordings by Robert Johnson and those kinds of
that like front porch sound.
Yes,
like,
it's very live, raw sound of what is happening in the moment. It's very much in the moment recording.
Excellent. Do not forget, we are here to have a full panel discussion. So even though Spencer and I have prepped ourselves for this discussion, we would love to hear your opinions on the matter. We would love your opinions and your perspective on this, because again, we both are 100% reinforcing the concept that this argument of music versus noise is a really subjective thing. Now, however, between the two of us, I would call music and noise to be rather exclusive. If one person decides that something's noise, they cannot possibly enjoy it as music if that's the decision that they've made for themselves. And Spencer would say,
it's a spectrum. It can go either way. It just totally it depends on the person. It depends on the situation. But I don't think they're separate. I think, and here's what I don't know if I actually mentioned this last time, but there are composers who work with only what you would call quote unquote noise that just happens out on the world, jackhammering, broken glass, that sort of thing.
mm-hmm.
But they construct those sounds in a way to make it a composition. Now, to some people, that would be considered music because it's got a construction, it's got a form, it's telling a story. Its message is being encoded in a certain way, it's transmitting, and they're decoding it in that way. And there's also composers out there who take bits and pieces of other types of music and they totally destroy it and they degrade it down to where it's nothing but white noise or whatever. Is that still music, or did you take music and turn it into noise? I think it's a sweeping. I think it's a needle on a sweeping motion. It just depends what's happening, who's in control, what's in control, versus.
Now, because our form conversation got cut short last night, I definitely learned that lesson is robust and it requires perhaps two different videos, two different lessons to cover. But since we cut that form discussion short, I'd like to go ahead and add form into the discussion in terms of, is form necessary in order to create music, or is lack of form taking you to a dangerous pathway towards noise?
Well, I think form is important to music. There's always some sort of structure there, even if it's minimal. There's freeform jazz where it's minimal structure. There's a few ground rules and then they take off and they're going. Some people would consider that noise. I would consider it music. A lot of other, well, again, I don't want to make too many blanket statements, but I think a lot of people would consider that music, but there's also a lot of people who would say that's just noise. It's cacophony. It's chaos.
So let's take probably one of the more argued about composers nowadays, Philip Glass.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Philip Glass. Now, I take Philip Glass on a extreme case by case basis. I can say I like pieces from Philip Glass, but I can't say I like his music because his music is so formless. So I cannot have expectations whenever I listen to Philip Glass, or else they will most likely be unfulfilled. So whenever I listen to Philip Glass, my expectations I have to destroy them. I have to put them away.
Well, and I think that's an interesting way to put it, but let me throw this at you. You could use that example for any artist. There are certain songs from this one artist that I could care less for, or there's certain songs from this artist that I absolutely love. It's very rare to have an artist that you're like, I love everything this person is putting out. Every piece of music they've created is gold.
Certainly.
It's very rare if it at all happens.
Yeah, those are your Beatles and like
even Beatles. There's, I mean, it's really hard to listen to Revolution 9. Sometimes it's super easy. I don't know, but like it just, there's not always going to be songs that catch you. There's always going to be those situations where with any artist, it doesn't matter if it's Philip Glass, the Beatles, you know, what are the kids listening to nowadays?
What are the kids listening?
Beyonce. There's going to be songs that like
Post Malone.
There you go. Yeah. 21 Pilots. There we go. Now
21 Pilots.
Now we're getting there.
We could have a whole talk about current pop music and the way it has changed. Expectations of music have changed.
But would you say that because of those songs that may not hit as well as others, would you say that they are less, or would you say that they are not music just because they're not as, they don't
Right. I see what you're getting at there. So my criticism of Philip Glass, I guess the statement that I just made about Philip Glass is more a reflection on his formlessness. He certainly has a style, but that style is so undefined that, as I said, I have to set my expectations aside. Philip Glass has a style because whenever I believe that if I were to listen to a Philip Glass piece blindfolded, I would probably identify it as Philip Glass.
Most certainly.
However, I may not enjoy it at all. I would call it music. It's an orchestration of sound that I would say has a message or a style or thought put into it. But I would say that I would not enjoy it. The idea being that my expectations have been put to the side, and I would just have to take it as is, right? If I were to listen to the Beatles, I would have an expectation. I would say, I'm probably going to have either a really, really catchy melody and a really, really great upbeat thing, or I'm going to have something that maybe is in the psychedelic category where maybe, again, I need to set aside some expectations, but I do believe I understand the universe and the style of the Beatles enough to have some expectations. Whereas Philip Glass might set a piano on fire.
He sure could, but there are people who have those expectations and those experiences to let them understand and relate to said piano being set on fire.
They would have phrase that again. I'm sorry.
They would take that piano set aflame to, I guess their expectations would be totally acceptable for their expectations to have that piano set on fire.
Sure. And I think, again, we come to the idea of active versus passive listening.
Right.
And we were also talking about form. So to make an intentional decision to have a lack of form, I think I've already heard your answer is that that's acceptable to make a...
I would say I would say that a lack of form would be when you start heading towards the side of the spectrum that's noise. The less form you have, the more it gets there. Not to say that in a general statement, because sometimes you can have a fairly formless piece that's also incredibly beautiful. But it just, that tends to be the case. As the arrow sweeps back towards the side of noise, it seems to be there's less form in the music that you're listening to.
So I think that we can begin to wrap up because we have got 4 to 6 or 7 minutes left. If there are any questions out there, please ask them. I would love to hear your questions. And don't forget about all of our previous lessons. We talked about melodies and how melodies can have directions, up, down, snaky, up and down, wavy, and sometimes they can just jump in different places. We've talked about the heartbeat of music and how you can divide that heartbeat, whether it be fast or slow. And we've also talked about scales and keys, and how the Western tonal system works, and how we can maybe have expectations or play with the expectations of the listener based on our cultural music system. And then we also talked about texture, temper, and form, the speed of your music, the intensity of your music, the types of instruments that have gone into it. All of these things are, well, they're musical tools, but they just happen. They're natural things that we can take advantage of as communicators, as musical people. So let's use maybe some of those concepts um, to help us in this discussion. Now, we're talking about form and formlessness and the intentionality that goes into music. Um, Listening to nature, listening to water, listening to birds. This tends to be a peaceful thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that approaching nature, attempting to imitate nature, would be the most pure form of music?
And this is where this gets hard, because if we're going by this system of style, intent, and content, you can say that a river running or a brook babbling has content and intention and style. Same with a bird call. It may not be like a grackle has a not nice, or a cactus wren has a not good bird call. They don't sound pretty. It's usually like a growly, grumbly kind of noise. But there's still content, intent, and style to it. So it gets kind of, does the lack of form mean it's not music? Or could you say that because, like a bird call, for instance, kind of has a form? It's got a rhythm, it's got a pace. Usually it repeats, unless you're talking about like a mockingbird or something like that. I would say that a bird call is music, because it kind of follows all of these steps. There's a message, they encoded it, they transmitted it. Usually it's another bird that decoded it, and they send feedback back, usually by another bird call.
And you can call this a positive or a negative feedback
Yeah.
loop, depending on what the result is.
Usually it's positive arousal.
Positive arousal in the aviation category. So I believe that we can wrap this all up with the basic idea, as Spencer has just said. Approaching nature actually, in many cases, does conform to the idea of purposeful communication. And what is music but a way to purposefully communicate something, whether it be let's all have a good time tonight, or you say you want to rev. I shouldn't sing the whole thing.
Copyright.
Yeah, I don't want YouTube to take me down.
Copyright.
But so that intentionality, and also we've discussed lack of intentionality. You being a bystander and listening to the bird, you can appreciate that bird.
You may not fully understand its intent, its content, and its style, but you can appreciate what it's got to say. It's the same thing as listening to music in a language you don't fully understand.
And some bird calls can be so patterned that they do have a real good sense of form in terms of maybe rhythm. If you listen to maybe crickets, they will have a rhythm based on temperature. So that is knowing that, you can actually get a lot of meaning out of the chirp of a cricket that maybe somebody who didn't know that information may passively ignore it.
I think the point of this lesson is that noise and music are typically just labels that we are assigning things in our own personal worlds from our own basis of opinions. It's totally subjective. It's always changing from person to person. It's hard, that's why it's such a magical experience when you meet those people who have very similar music tastes to you, I would say, because it's like, yes, we share that same language that nobody else seems to understand. It's totally a label-based subjective thing.
And it's definitely it's multifaceted in terms of culture, in terms of someone having more experience and being able to look deep into the technicalities of something versus somebody who just loves the sound of piano. Some people can perhaps for their own gain dig into the technicalities and try to actively understand. But what's wrong with passively enjoying the things around you? Do you need to have a name for it?
I don't think so. I don't think that's necessary. It's sometimes fun to do that if you're into that sort of thing, but I don't think you don't always need to absolutely dissect everything you listen to.
100%. Well, this has been a discussion about music versus noise, and this ends all 5 lessons of this music series. So I hope you've got a lot of food for thought today. I hope you've learned a lot of words and a lot of ways that you can express yourself or communicate yourself, and also some things to think about. Your instrument choice might be the way that you encode your message. Maybe your message is encoded through an upward or downward melody. You have to think about the transmission. If you don't practice and you don't play that melody right, nobody's going to decode it properly because you got stuck up in the noise over here, the classical.
You'll get negative feedback.
You'll get negative feedback and you'll feel sad.
Okay.
My name is Eric Carafino.
I'm Spencer Vanderveer.
We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us ramble. You may reach me through Facebook, YouTube, or ecarafino@gmail.com. You can also reach Spencer Vanderveer through his Facebook, his YouTube, his Instagram. Give all your shout outs real quick.
I post videos twice a week on YouTube under the Spencer Vanderveer channel. I tend to share those as well on my Instagram and Facebook, but it doesn't always happen. You can reach me through any of those platforms absolutely easily.
Thank you so much for joining us. You have a wonderful time. And hey, go back and watch all those videos again. You'll learn plenty. Send me some questions.
And we like you just the way you are.
All right.